Our moderator for the session is Nomwelase Skenjana. She is the Divisional Head for Domestic and Regional Settlement Services in the National Payments System Department here at the Reserve Bank. Let's give her a warm round of applause as she introduces her panelists.
Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to call up all the panelists, Justin Jacobs, Debbie Janeczek, and Michelé Schliesser. Now, I apologize if I butcher these names. I do experience it with my own name. Thank you. All right, I think it's important for me to introduce the panelists and at least give you a flavor of who they are. So Debbie Janeczek is the Chief Security Officer at the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunications. But now, I think this sounds very foreign. This is SWIFT. And I think you better know it as SWIFT. So Debbie is the Chief Security Officer of SWIFT. And then we have Michelé Schliesser, and Michelé, at least she told me she also can't pronounce her surname better than her husband. So that gives me a sense of comfort. Is the Chief Information Officer at the South African Reserve Bank, also responsible for business solutions and technology. And last we have Justin Jacobs, and Justin is the Head of Payments at the Bank of England, responsible for payments, settlements, and innovation supervision. So welcome, Justin and Debbie, to South Africa. So without any delay, let's start with an interesting poll that we thought we should start this conversation with, and sense and sort of gauge what the attendees feel, the financial community. What do you feel about what brings the rise in cyber and operational resilience? And I think something is showing on screen, on Slido, where you can scan and join the conversation to just set the scene and give us an indication that, in your view, what are the key things, what is the major contribution to the increase that we have seen in the past 4 years in cyber and operational resilience? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We're so much aligned. I was worried if there were to be a majority of you that say complacency with risk mitigation, and I'm thinking we'll leave risk. I wouldn't accept that as an option. So we were very much aligned, because I also have a view that advanced and sophisticated criminality is the major risk, that whenever we look at one use case, by the time we are grounded and we know what to do, there's a new one, there's a new modus operandi. So with that being said and setting the scene, let's start with our panel members. So in terms of understanding payment system threat landscape, I would appreciate if you can take us through real life example, and let's start making this real. What have you seen? What have been the measures? What have you done in your own world? You all coming from critical infrastructures for payments, from the BOE to the SAB to the SWIFT at the center of financial market infrastructures. So maybe let me start with you, Debbie, to share with us what have you seen, what is the latest trends, and how have you reacted to that?
I would like to use an example that we all dealt with last year, Move It. And that was one of the most expensive breaches in the history, $10 billion, affected over 2,000 organizations worldwide and over 60 million individuals. So Move It is something that many companies use as their data transfer. And last year there was a zero-day vulnerability. So that is a vulnerability in the software that is unknown to the software developers, that once they see it, they build a patch for it. The threat actors were able to take that vulnerability and use it, exploit it, and we had the biggest breach we saw for $10 billion cost. Some of the things that we should do as companies with that, how do you deal with that? We all deal with zero-day breaches, so there's two examples, a very tactical and a very strategic. The first one is the tactical one, is we all have to patch. Patch management, how do you do your zero-day patches? What are your SLAs? How quick do you get your patches in place? And what are your compensating controls while you're testing the patch and implementing the patch? As we saw with CrowdStrike, we want to test our patches before we implement them. The second one is something that we're all dealing with as payments, as banks, third-party vendors. This is a third-party vendor. How do we know the risk that we're bringing into our organizations using third parties? So what we've done at SWIFT is we have a very comprehensive vendor risk management process that includes our procurement, our legal, our security, and when we bring in new vendors, they go through a very rigorous process of what is their cybersecurity and what do we want their cybersecurity to be. We're also starting getting questions from our overseers on this and questions on what is your fourth party. How do you address your third parties for their third party risk, which is our fourth party. We also have what we call technology vendor committee that we have. So every organization within our company that is bringing in a new vendor has to go through, check the box, talking to security, what are the security implications, what are the legal implications, and then they have to bring it to a committee so that we approve all the vendors coming in so that we try to reduce our third-party risk. So those are some of the tactical and the strategic tactics that we are taking to deal with the risk.
I'm actually picking about three major risks just in your response: the concentration risk, the third-party risk, now that is extending to a further level within, the relationships and support you have in your IT world. Michelé, if you were to be kind and share with us, how do you manage the risk in SAB when it comes to making sure that critical infrastructures are not disrupted?
Thanks very much, Nomwelase. So I'm a firm believer that the way you manage risk is by having experts in the organization with the right skills to continuously renew their skills so that they are able to understand the threat landscape, understand potential threat actors, and then be able to take the appropriate response to mitigate it. I'd like to maybe just build on Debbie's answer in terms of examples that we've had closer to home around resilience issues. And with permission from Lesotho, last year on the 11th of December, Lesotho had a ransomware attack and their VMware was encrypted. Both governors asked SAB to get involved. And one of the critical ways that we solve this is by working together, getting people, experts, both in Lesotho, experts in South Africa, third-party experts, to actually come in and work in what we call a CSIRT, a Cybersecurity Incident Response Team, and collectively bring the wisdom together. By using that type of tactic, we were able to circumvent what was encrypted, get to the back end of the data, collect the data, and actually then rebuild that VM environment, and we're able to therefore circumvent that ransomware attack.
Thank you, Michelé. In fact, that spikes a sense of pride in me. Not that the work that was done to rescue our central bank in Lesotho, the fact that we were able to offer them a third-level contingency through the SADC RTGS to be able to continue and process payments in their jurisdiction. And it's a sense of pride. I don't think it's ever been done anywhere else. And as a SADC community, we're going strong in positioning the SADC RTGS as a third-level contingency. So moving to you, Justine, if you can share with us your experiences and what you have done in terms of those. It is nice to get the different regions, and I think England is an advanced economy, so we have to learn from you.
Well, first of all, if you'll indulge me for a minute, I just want to thank you for inviting me today and for putting on this really wonderful conference. And actually, to your point, I don't pretend to come here with all the answers. Actually, I think it's really valuable to learn from each other, and the discussion you've been having over the course of this conference is equally relevant to us in the UK. In fact, over the summer, we published a discussion paper on the Bank of England's approach to innovation in money and payments. And we're grappling with many of the same issues. So one of the issues we've put out there is whether, as a central bank, we need to play more of a leadership role in payments in order to achieve the outcomes that we want to see. And we've got similar challenges around having a relatively old faster payment system that's been very successful in many ways, but isn't used at point of sale. So in the UK, we have seen a significant decline in the use of cash, but in fact, what we've seen is that it's the card systems that really now dominate the consumer experience at point of sale, and that brings many valuable benefits to consumers and others, but equally it leaves us quite dependent on that route using cards, and it's really interesting to understand what the barriers are to using a faster payment system at point of sale that you've been talking about. Over the course of the year in the UK, there have been a number of incidents impacting our faster payment system, our card systems, and our wholesale payment system that we run in the Bank of England. I should say most of the incidents impacted only some of the payments going through those systems, and all were fixed within a small number of hours, and certainly all by the end of the day. But I think there were three sort of important lessons that we have learnt from that. First of all, not one of those incidents was a direct fault of the relevant payment system operator. One of the incidents was caused by a critical third party. Another incident was caused by a large participant in the payment system who had problems with their gateway into the payment system. And because they're a large participant, that meant a lot of payments going around the system were delayed and slowed. And another incident was caused by a payments aggregator, a firm that some merchants had chosen as a way to access the card systems, and that payments aggregator had an incident which meant that some card transactions were delayed or not working. But ultimately, it doesn't matter who is the cause of a blockage in the payment system. The consumer doesn't care. They just know that their payment isn't working. And one thing we do know is that trust is very hard to earn, but very easy to lose. So what are we doing about it in the Bank of England? First of all, we keep reiterating to our payment system operators that it is really important that they think about ecosystem-wide risk. What risks are they responsible, and what are they going to do about it? What are the risks that their participants face, and how do they make sure their participants are tackling those risks? Is something that we keep reiterating to them, that they have to have that ecosystem-wide approach. They also need to make sure they are managing their outsourced relationships effectively, which is to Debbie's point about third-party risks. And we published a policy statement last year setting out what good third-party risk management looks like, and we'll be holding firms to account for making sure that they deliver that. We're also thinking about the regulatory regime that we have in the UK. So the UK government has created a new regime for critical third parties, and these are looking at critical third parties to the financial sector as a whole, and we're going through a process at the moment across the UK authorities in identifying those most critical third parties that our government will then put within our regulatory remit so that we can supervise those activities directly ourselves. So moving beyond financial firms to the key firms that support the financial sector. And we're also discussing with the government at the moment whether our regulatory perimeter might also be extended to cover all the critical nodes in those critical payment ecosystems, so that we can make sure that those end-to-end payments flow, come what may. The second lesson I would draw out is that firms need to be really, really alert. With the growing importance of electronic payment systems, alongside the growth of social media, we noticed that payments only a small number of payments have to be delayed or stop working, and it is very, very quickly all over social media, and very, very quickly makes the news in the UK because we're so dependent on electronic payment systems. So firms need to be really alert. They need to understand what flows to expect, and as soon as you see deviation from those flows, act quickly to identify the problem and fix it. Too often we see the ecosystem going, well, it's not me, it's them. But that's not good enough. We need working together to tackle those problems. And thirdly, I know complacency was not seen as a big cause of things, but actually I would challenge that a little bit. I do think there is more we all need to do to get the basics right. When we look at the cause of those incidents I've talked about, the main root cause is always change management, poorly executed change management, either because the procedures aren't followed or a change has been improperly identified in terms of its importance and therefore not properly managed, or it just hasn't been properly tested. So I do think there is something more about getting the basics right, and that we mustn't be complacent about that.
Thank you, Justin. I wouldn't agree with you more that we often neglect the communications part to control the narrative, and we want to deal with the problem, and when we wake up, the reputational risk is huge.
Yes.
And people are then, sharing false information, and it is important what you're highlighting. Now, taking from what you've highlighted, interconnectedness that makes us a payment ecosystem, blaming each other is not going to help. So I would like us to move forward and understand at activity level. We have frameworks, we have good frameworks that have come out of SWIFT, we have frameworks that are coming out of the BIS, and at a practical management level, what is it that we do in our organizations to strengthen risk and to strengthen business continuity? Yes, David.
Okay. So some of the things that we do, we have a very, very robust operational resiliency and operational excellence. We do extensive training. We just rolled out last year operational excellence training, like to your point of change management. How do we keep that robust? Is we make sure we educate the workforce on operational excellence and resiliency. We also have a robust internally crisis management, very laid out, where we have a crisis exec, and she has two alternatives. No three shall be on holiday at the same time or on a flight at the same time. And we have 24-hour, 24/7 command center that if there is an issue, whether it's cybersecurity or a resiliency issue, a change management issue, they are to the point of communications, communicating with the customers, communicating internally, and the crisis management team and the crisis exec determines when it gets to the point of bringing the CEO in, or when we kick off a crisis team. Also, we have business continuity tests. We have 4 weekend tests a year. We have 100 simulations a year. We have 300 service continuity tests a year, and we test these with our customers. The central banks, to make sure that we are, testing our resiliency. For resiliency, we have our 3 layers of defense. Or 3 layers of resiliency, sorry. And that is, if there is an issue, we have same site resiliency, where immediately it's mirrored, it immediately moves to another site. We have inner site. If that is not working, it goes from one data center to one in a different country. And then we have a cold startup site that is at an undisclosed location. And this one we test yearly with our customers, and we have SLAs for all of those. What else we do internally is we have, in my organization, we do over 500 risk assessments a year. Those are more tactical cybersecurity, where we have mitigations built out, and we hold accountable the timeline of those mitigations. If we don't meet those mitigations, we then move to risk accept with the executive committee. And then we have our second line of our enterprise risk management that holds us accountable and also does their own risk management assessments.
Thank you, Debbie. SWIFT has played a very critical role in improving cyber resilience within financial market infrastructures. I remember when SWIFT introduced the cybersecurity program, it felt like a burden, but today we appreciate it and we incorporate it in our regulations.
The cybersecurity program came out of Bank of Bangladesh, and we support the customers with that. We have controls that the cybersecurity control framework that our customers all use and attest to every year, and we've seen that keeps the SWIFT network on the customer side secure, and we've seen the customer incidents since that was implemented dropped completely. It's been, yeah, it's really impressive, and we update those controls yearly, and we work closely with our customers.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, Michelé, you know, without revealing my age, I've been in SAB for some years. At some point, the recovery time objective was 4 hours. And before we know it, it was reduced to 2 hours. And we wondered if we're going to keep up with this change. Share with us the detailed activities that you do at the SAB to be able to keep business, you know, critical tier 1 systems operating.
Thanks, Nomwelase. So we obviously have extensive structures and preventative measures in place across SAB. Very similar to what Debbie was explaining, we have a very robust business continuity management and resilient plan. We internally in SAB, we do preparedness at 3 levels. We have a Joint Operations Center, or JOC, which is chaired by normally the Chief Operating Officer. We prepare them by annual simulation. We have a technical CSIRT, or Cybersecurity Incident Response Team. I chair that, so if there are any incidents, we will tackle it through that. And then we have operational preparedness as well. We call it Pizza Fridays. We will do simulations at a technical level. Depending on what will happen from a threat intel perspective, we will ensure that the teams are actually very aware of what threat actors are doing and how we respond to that. At a financial critical infrastructure level, we also have a CSIRT, or Cybersecurity Incident Response Team. They meet every second month, every formal meeting. Some of you may be part of that. They will look at also cyber threat sharing, cybersecurity collaboration, early warning, situational awareness, etc. Under the FSCF, or the Financial Services Contingency Forum, which is part of the Financial Stability Oversight Committee, we also have a Cyber Resilience Subcommittee. They also meet quarterly. They again do things like cyber threat sharing, cybersecurity collaboration, early warning, situational awareness, etc. We are trying to formally establish a financial sector CSIRT. In fact, we didn't mention earlier, in August 2022, we had a near miss in SAB where our perimeters were compromised, and we then created a SAB CSIRT, but we actually got 4 of the cyber leads from the other commercial banks involved, and they actually sat in our CSIRTs, and they actually provided input and some suggestions in terms of what to do, and from that we've actually got the formation of the sector CSIRT. So that's quite a lot that we actually do. Obviously, from a technical perspective, very similar to what Debbie was saying. We're currently running our national payment system from the alternative sites. We have a primary data center, secondary data center, third level contingency, etc. So we follow all the best practices from a technical perspective internally within SAB as well.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Michelé. Justine, would you like to reflect on this as well? Building this resilience comes at a cost, and not all players can afford, and would like to see what is the kind of thought leadership that's making this, you know, affordable going forward. And can you share with us what are the things?
Well, that's a good question. I think I might put it in the context of various sector-wide exercising that we lead as a great way of kind of sharing those lessons across our sector, so that whether you're big or small, you get the benefit of understanding what lessons we've learned from those exercises that we run. And there's a couple I was going to talk about specifically. So in 2022, we ran a cyber stress test, a market-wide cyber stress test, effectively. So we created a hypothetical scenario, which was a data integrity scenario impacting retail payments. So the scenario was that a threat actor had successfully infiltrated 2 large retail banks and was redirecting payments by amending payee details in those 2 banks concurrently. So the exercise assumed that the disruption happened. It wasn't looking at whether or not the banks could prevent it, but it was looking at, if that happened, how would the sector cope? How would it identify that? And how would it respond to it if that sort of event happened? And there were 6 kind of key findings from that we then shared with the sector as a whole, so that they could think about that as they do their own plans for these sorts of scenarios. The first of those, and I touched upon it earlier actually, is the importance of industry coordination and decision making. There is a risk when these things happen that every bank or payment services provider does their own thing, and that can really complicate an effective detection and recovery. And we've seen that in some incidents where, say for example, one bank will just block all payments, but that then causes massive sort of impacts across the ecosystem. So having clear industry leadership and coordination was one lesson coming out of that. The second was, and again it's been touched upon already, but the real importance of consistent, timely and effective external communication. Absent external communication, people get very worried, and again you lead to that spiral of unfortunate events cascading from that. The third scenario was around contingencies, and really thinking about to what extent banks or payment systems can reroute payments if one of them is experiencing a problem. And obviously ISO 20022 really helps with that, and I know it came up yesterday in terms of rerouting as a really valuable way of dealing with incidents. The fourth one was banks thinking ahead about how will they support customers in the event that these sorts of incidents occur. So their policies on maybe emergency overdrafts or making cash available if, for whatever reason, the payment systems aren't functional. The fifth one was the importance of reconciliation and having a really clear recovery point objective, so making sure you take a cut of clean data regularly so that if things get corrupted, you've got a clear, clean data set to go back to. And then the sixth and final one was just testing and the importance of testing. And so we run those market-wide exercises, but then you want individual institutions to then do their own testing and see how what lessons they can take from that. This week, we ran another exercise, actually. This was an industry-wide, market-wide exercise that we ran jointly with UK Finance, which is the trade association for the sector in the UK, and the other UK authorities. And this was a market-wide exercise which looked at how the sector would respond in the event of a major infrastructure failure. This is an external infrastructure failure, like a catastrophic failure in the power grid that meant power was unavailable for an extended period. And again, we've worked through how the sector would respond to that. In this scenario, what would they need, say, from authorities to support them? What would individual institutions do? And how could they work together to mitigate the impact on consumers and stay safe and secure? We only ran that actually on the day I was coming out here, so I don't yet have the lessons learned from that. We will publish them in due course. But I think the broad flavour there is one of the roles that we see ourselves playing is just bringing the industry together, running these sorts of exercises so that we can work through how prepared the industry is and really share those lessons across the industry. So whether a particular firm is part of the exercise or not, they can benefit from the learnings.
Yes, knowledge sharing is very important in our environment. And if we want to remain an ecosystem as we describe ourselves and pushing for cross-border payments, and the network is wider. So let's move to you, Michelé, and we're seeking thought leadership here. What can be done more? What are the new tricks in the game that are coming up that we're likely to see to strengthen our operational resilience and cyber threats? And in the wake of 24/7, how do you manage to have teams that are effective and monitoring throughout the day? I mean, in the earlier days, we used to have maintenance days or maintenance windows. With now being switched on, 24/7, what does that mean in the future world?
Yeah, so obviously technology advances, and part of where we're going now is previously you used to have a primary and a secondary data center. You're now thinking about your third level contingency in a third data center, so that if you lose in one, and if you're doing 24/7 or you've got high availability and something happens in the one data center and it replicates into the other, takes both data centers out, so then your third level contingency is where you address your 24/7. I'd like to just pick up on something that Justin said. Justin spoke quite a bit about what the industry is doing in terms of the simulation or a power grid failure as an example. So quite a few of you in the audience will be aware that we've got an alternative connectivity initiative that we're busy running, where we've done a scenario, and particularly during the course of last year and the previous year, where load shedding was quite a real threat in South Africa, that national blackout could actually bring our payment systems down. In fact, it would bring our payment systems down. We did a piece of work to have a look at all the major banks, etc. How long would they be able to keep their data centers up and running? The scenario that we had looked at was that if we had a national blackout, that it would take 10 to 14 days for electricity to be restored across the country. And therefore, most data centers would need to be able to be operable for 7 to 14 days. But our biggest weakness actually is our networks, because most of our networks, they're not point-to-point. They have multiple hops, and in each hop you need to be able to have electricity that keeps those hops running, etc. So we have started an initiative and been working quite widely with a CIO forum. The Deputy Governor and myself have been meeting quite a lot of the financial institutions to say, in this scenario, how would we keep the payment systems up and running? And the Alternative Connectivity Project was brought to life through that. And I'm quite delighted to say that SARB's part of the solution will be operable from October in the chosen site. And we intend to expand that for multiple scenarios, to say not just for a national blackout, but for a cybersecurity. Could we use this alternative network? We lost some of our undersea cables earlier this year. We had major issues from a Microsoft perspective. Anybody that was involved in cloud, couldn't actually use it. If we lost the undersea cables, what would happen to our ability to communicate outside of South Africa, etc. So the Alternative Connectivity Project will actually grow a couple of legs and will actually start be able to address multiple scenarios, not just the blackout.
Thank you, Michelé. So, Debbie, would you like us to share with us, maybe in confidence, what is coming up at Cybos on this matter, so that some of us that are not going to Cybos get a view and a hint of what's coming up in this world?
So Cybos is going to be in Beijing this year. It's going to be a big event, lots of speakers. We do have some cybersecurity speakers coming. Yes. If you're not going, you should go. It'll be great. We have most of the big banks are there representing, a lot of conversation. We have over 200 SWIFT employees going that can engage with everybody at Cybos. Yeah.
Usually Cybos, they share groundbreaking thought leadership of things that are coming in the pipeline. We're looking forward to that.
Sneak peek.
Yes. I think I've touched on the cost issue of building this resilience, and the fact that we are an ecosystem. In my view, it means all or nothing. I would like to test with you, Justin, in terms of regulation. When I joined payments, regulation was simply explained as something you do when you want to start something, and something you do when you want to stop something. So that's my simple version of what regulation is. As regulators, what role do you see? My boss also always talks about moral suasion, but moral suasion, can take you, thus far. Yeah. So can you share with us?
Yes, no, thank you. And it's interesting, you used the word moral suasion. So we deliberately, about 10 years ago, moved from calling it oversight of payment systems to calling it supervision of payment systems. Okay. And we have a legal statutory footing for the work we do now with regard to the systemically important payment systems within our remit. But So it's more than just when you start and stop, but of course we want to be proportionate. And a lot of the work we do is by putting the onus back on the firms to demonstrate to us how they're going to deliver the outcomes that we want. And the outcomes that we want is to ensure that critical bits of the sector are able to respond to and recover from extreme but plausible events before markets or the payments ecosystem and the customer is significantly disrupted. And we put the onus on the firms to then tell us what that means and how they're going to deliver that. And we've come up with a sort of a lexicon, a terminology around that. So the first thing that we expect firms to do is to identify what we call their important business services. The services that they undertake that, if they're disrupted, could threaten financial stability. So if you're a payment systems operator, that will tend to be the main payment service that you operate, for example. We then ask firms to set impact tolerances for those. That means how much disruption could take place before harm is done. So, for example, a payment system might say that we need to make sure that we can respond and recover by end of day, come what may. Because end of day can be a significant point in terms of a value date and have knock-on impacts if you go beyond that end of day. And then we look at what firms are doing, and then we determine whether we think they've set an appropriate impact tolerance. Most importantly, firms then have to demonstrate that they can stay within that impact tolerance under extreme but plausible scenarios, or invest to get there. And we've told firms to come to us with their library of scenarios, how they've thought about extreme but plausible in their context, and what they're doing to make sure that they can recover within that timeline under these sorts of events. And we've given firms 3 years to do all that. The deadline is March 2025, and obviously we're tracking closely to see how the industry is responding to that. And maybe to give you a flavour of what good looks like. So good might be to say that the important business service is the provision of a specific payment type that a firm runs. And the impact tolerance might be end of day. So what's extreme but plausible? Well, an example of extreme but plausible would be a successful cyber attack that impacts their ability for their system to operate. And of course, the resilient systems will have maybe 2 or 3 active sites available at any one time. But the challenge with that is that if one of them is successfully compromised by a cyber attacker, that can replicate across all their sites very, very quickly. So what some firms are coming back with is to say, in that sort of scenario, we're going to invest in a minimum viable product or a cold start type solution. It might be cloud-based, so that if they are successfully attacked and their systems are compromised and not working, they have the recovery data that I talked about before, and they can go to a site that is not impacted, perhaps sitting in the cloud, to have a minimum viable product while they fix the problem in their main systems. So that's an example of the sort of things that we're looking for firms to come back with. And as I say, the deadline is next March, but most firms are making good progress on that.
All right. Thank you, Justin. So I suppose on that note, let's take questions from the audience whilst Michelé shares with us what you intend to do in Africa and African countries, because we tend to depend on international entities to identify if there is, trouble in our own space. So I would like you to share how are we going to bring mechanisms to make sure that we take charge of this and we reduce the dependency.
Thanks, Norm. So we've, as SALV, we've become part of the Operational Security Situational Awareness Committee that's run by the BIS, or in fact, their conference was held 2 weeks ago. 50 central banks actually participated. There were only 2 African banks that were there. Our responsibility is to take what we learn from forums like that and through the SADC region to actually have the same mechanism in place with SADC. And we already have it in place. We have a 2-weekly forum run very much on the same lines of OSAC for SADC. And we build the SADC community through that forum.
Okay, thank you, Michelé. Let's go to the questions, ladies and gentlemen. Table 28.
Hi there, it's Deline here, currently working with the SARB on the DFID as an SME. My question is pretty much related to digital identity and the way that it's being used throughout the world from a payments perspective as an enabler. And obviously we don't have a global golden source, but there could be quite a bit of value in the various countries working together as it relates to digital identity. But what is your view in terms of being able to build something like that, or having the various regions that have digital identity work together? And then the second question is on AI sophistication and the capability of needing to prove personhood even before you prove the identity of the individual, and what are you seeing globally from a trend perspective?
All right, before we respond to the questions, let's take the next table, table 57, as we prepare to respond.
Madam Chair, thank you very much indeed. My name is Alistair Tempest. I'm from the E-Commerce Forum of South Africa. There is a leitmotif that's coming through this, which is cooperation. And I wanted to ask the panel two questions related to that. The first one is cross-border cooperation to stop cybercrime, because it's very often not in your own country, but outside your own country that the threats come, and the UK certainly knows about that. The second question is cooperation within the country. Now, the information regulator is in charge of looking for breaches, or making sure that breaches of data are stopped. Breaches of data very often lead to financial problems or financial theft. So does SARB cooperate with the information regulator in order to ensure that when there is a data breach, let's say of a large company, for example, where the data has been taken, to make sure that that data is not being used for theft? Thank you very much.
Thank you for that question. So let's first start with you, Justin, if you don't mind, to respond to the digital identity and its valuable contribution to the cause.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, digital ID is really interesting, actually. It's an area where I would say the UK hasn't really gone down that road. ID is quite a sensitive topic in the UK from a digital ID perspective, and ID cards and things like that. So actually, one of the challenges we face in our sector is, and one of the reasons why perhaps our faster payment system hasn't been used much for point of sale so far, is to make a transfer from one person to another, you need to use someone's, what we call the sort code and account number. So you've got a 6-digit sort code and an 8-digit account number. And you need that for any domestic payments that you want to make across our interbank payment trail. So we haven't gone down the road of digital ID. We did try at one point of something called PayM, where you could link your mobile phone number to your bank details, but that didn't take off for a variety of different reasons. And actually, we did experience this problem where data was being inputted correctly and the money was ending up in the wrong person's account. And then, of course, it's very difficult to reverse that because you need the consent of the person who's received the money. So one of the things that was introduced in the UK a couple of years ago was confirmation of payee. So when you put in someone's sort code and account number and their name, your bank very quickly tells you if that matches with the name at the recipient bank as a way to try and minimize those accidental payments. But I think digital ID is a really interesting topic where I think we're looking at what other countries are doing and learning from that.
Thank you, Justin. So Debbie, do you mind taking the AI sophistication to respond to the global threat?
So, AI sophistication, I'm going to take it a little bit away from the digital. AI sophistication is a new technology that is going to be super beneficial and helpful that we can use, but it also is going to be create new threats that we have to look at. And then you look at Gen AI. So if you, from a cybersecurity perspective, as the CISO, I have to look at innovation at Swift, and we have to support the AI innovations, but how do we do that securely, and what controls do we put in place? Also, I have to look at it from a threat actor perspective, and what is going to be using AI coming at me, and how do I protect my organization from that? So some of the things that we're looking at and implementing is this a very technical, tactical piece is the incident response. So new endpoint detection response tools have continuous monitoring, AI built in, where they monitor your network. If there is an anomaly, it just doesn't identify and send an alert. It identifies, it mitigates, it segregates from your network. So the low-level mitigation is AI. You also have to look at phishing now is coming at you. Threat actors are using AI, and you have to put, there's new tools out there that use AI to help you fight that. So you have to look at it from both a threat perspective and a supporting your business perspective. So it's very, AI is the new buzzword right now, and it's something that we're looking closely at. We have an AI governance council within Swift, where we have mapped out all tools that will have AI, and every innovation that has to use AI has to go through the council for approval and security guidelines that will have to be put in place. So it's a good question. AI is
Thank you, David. So, Michelé, let's finish with you as we wrap up. I know you've touched on collaboration and CSATs that we have across Africa and in country, but there's a particular question that talks to the regulator for data protection. Can you share with us then, in South Africa, how do we cooperate and collaborate, to manage these risks?
Thank you. I'm going to ask the first part of the question. So in terms of collaboration, and particularly around cybercrime, even when we had our near miss, we had the State Security Agency actively involved with us. We had a forensics company also involved that actually traced all the steps. We were able to physically open a case, give it to the State Security Agency, because obviously it is across boundaries and borders in terms of where the various cybercrime actually happens, and then they will take the matter to try and ensure that we can prevent those cybercrimes from happening again. From an information regulator perspective, we don't have them yet in our CSIRTs, but it is something that we can certainly explore.
Going forward. Thank you very much. I hope, ladies and gentlemen, you've gained some insights, and some of these discussions are not necessarily to teach, but rather to showcase confidence, because payments is a function of trust, and to bring these financial market infrastructures on stage to give you confidence that aspects are being looked at, work is being done. And on that note, thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, a very, very big round of applause for the panel and Nomwelase. Let's give her a big round of applause.